We have the story that Jacob, after having to leave his the home of his parents, because his brother was pursuing him, and also to go find a shidduch, to find a soulmate, is on a journey going from Israel, from Beersheba, where he lived, to Haran, which was northeast of Israel, like approximately where Syria is today. Yeah, so these countries and these geographic locations are still in the news, they just have different names. Haran in Hebrew comes from the word wrath, as in anger, wrath. It refers to divine wrath. It was considered to be a very non-spiritual environment. Beersheba, the city that he's leaving, the beginning of the chapter, Vayetzi Yaakov Beersheba, that Yaakov leaves the city of Beersheba, literally means the fountain of seven. In the Kabbalistic writings, the mystical writings, the fountain of seven refers to the seven emotions, a very high cosmic spiritual level. And so Jacob is essentially leaving a very sublime and soulful place to enter into the wrath of the universe. And as the commentaries explain, this is really the story of each of our lives. As the soul enters into a body when we are born upon birth, it leaves a fountain of seven, and it enters into a place that is filled with wrath, a place of concealed spirituality. And it's difficult to find often our purpose, to find gentleness and kindness in a world that is so often, as I said, driven by wrath, not necessarily conscious wrath, but some form of wrath. We have a problem? And so then it continues that Jacob arrives at a certain place. Later we'll find out this place was the Temple Mount. And he goes to sleep there as the sun sets. He takes several stones upon which he rests his head, and he goes to sleep from his weary from his journeys. And here the chapter continues in the third verse that he has a dream. He has a dream. So you can imagine Jacob lying there, sleeping on a rock, and his dream says Vayachlim, he dreams Vehine, and behold, Sulam Mutzav Arza, he sees a ladder with its legs on the ground. V'reishe Magia Shemaima, and its head, the top of the ladder. Reishe in Hebrew means top, it also means head. The top of the ladder is reaching into the heavens. And then he sees angels climbing, ascending and descending on this ladder. And then the verse continues that he hears God speak to him, that God stands above him and speaks and tells him that I will protect you. I am the God of your father Abraham and Isaac, and wherever you go I shall protect you. And then he gives him the famous classic blessing, Ufaratzta Yom Avokedem V'Tzafein V'Negba, that you and your children and your descendants will spread all over the earth from Yom Avokedem, which is east and west, Tzafein V'Negba, north and south. And he continues to bless him that he shouldn't be afraid of entering to this place of wrath, because God is with him and he has the blessings and he'll be able to build a family. And the continuing episode talks about how Jacob promises God that he wants to return back home in peace. But if you read these few verses, it's really the story of our lives. How we enter into a cruel, difficult, dark world. And we may make this entry many times in our lives. The first time, of course, is upon birth. But later in the stages of life, there are many times as we mature and we leave our parents' homes, like Jacob did, or other stages in life where we go through different transitions, different key milestones, where we enter into new situations, which sometimes has promise, but also has challenge. And sometimes the challenge actually can be a very dark place. So essentially the story of the blessing that God gives Jacob is one that's given to each of us, that we don't go alone, that in this journey we have support, that we have the blessings and we have the strengths, the powers to overcome any challenge, because there's a purpose in this journey. And the purpose is for us to enter this place of wrath and turn it into a place of love. And we have the power to do so. So not only do we have the ability to protect ourselves from not being harmed by the selfishness and by the narcissism of this universe, but we also have the power to actually influence it, to transform it. And this is in essence, if you wish, the essence of the Jewish message, the universal Jewish message from the time of Abraham, that not only are we here to protect ourselves and play defense, but we're here to be on the offense, because our souls are charged with a mission. We enter into a world of wrath to turn it into a kinder space. That each of us are taking our corner of the world, and each of us is given our own particular corner. And as the Kabbalists say, each of us has been allocated a certain amount of divine sparks. And these sparks are scattered in your life. They're scattered in the places you'll travel to, the places you've lived and you will live. They're scattered in the work you do. They're scattered in your opportunities, in your skills, in your personality, in the food you eat, in the people you meet, even the things that seem random and seeming almost trivial in life. Everything has sparks. Everything has called spiritual opportunities. So not only, as I said, do we have to not be afraid, our job, our mission is, think of it as to gather these sparks and gather them and redeem them, reveal them, release them from their trap. They're trapped in their dark places. So a simple example, you're walking in a field. I don't know how many of us walk in fields, but just you can imagine it. Fine. You're walking in a field and you see an apple tree. And there's a very luscious, juicy apple looking at you and asking to be eaten, or so you think. So here you go. This is just one example of millions. I'm just using a very simple example. You take the apple of the tree, and you have really three options here. One option is to just gobble down, indulge in the apple on a hot day, and the juice of the apple goes into your mouth. And if it's not an apple, you can say an orange, whatever fruit you like, plums, pears, whatever it is. I'm not locked here into the apple analogy. It's just an example. You can just indulge in it, and that's it. You've refreshed yourself, and as they say, and that's that. The second option is you can just ignore it and not do anything, just leave the apple hanging. And the third option is you can have the conscientiousness, sensitivity to realize this apple was sent your way, and that it has divine sparks in it, and that you eat it with discretion, not with indulgence. Make a blessing, recognize, thank God for the gift you were given, and in the more mystical terms, redeem the sparks by the energy as that apple becomes part of your flesh and blood. And you digest it, and you become a little stronger and more energetic. That energy you use to do something positive. And then the apple thanks you for participating, for being part of helping make the world a better place. And the truth is, as I said, the apple is just an example. We have thousands of such opportunities every second. People you meet, when you commute, when you walk down the street, what you look at, what you hear, what you see. So those that are truly aligned and attuned with their spiritual mission are always looking for these opportunities. No different than a business person who's always looking for another opportunity for his business. So these are spiritual business people who will look for opportunities, sparks everywhere. Most of us, when we become aware of it, we may look and sometimes discover, a few times a day would also be nice. But one thing is for sure, the key thing is to go to move away from the natural selfish attitude to life, which means that me, and everything is for my taking, for me to indulge in, and think in terms of that you're responsible to make your corner of the world a better place. So that's what Jacob is told, and is told that he's given all the blessings, and same thing is we're told the same thing, that we have all the power. And even though sometimes the challenge seems foreboding, seems overwhelming, the fact of the matter is that just because we have limited vision and we can't always see the strength that we ourselves have. So that, in very general terms, is in itself a powerful message just from the beginning of this week's Torah portion. But let's take it a step further. What is the significance of the dream, of the beginning of the dream, the ladder? And everything that happened here could have happened without the ladder. Jacob could have had a dream that God comes to him and says to him, I am here, I will protect you. I will guide you, I will be with you even in the darkest of times. What's the significance of the ladder? And remember, it's a ladder, it's a dream. It's not an actual ladder. There's actually there was the man called the Helik Originer. He was a great big tzaddik in the 18th, 19th century. And he was known as a child prodigy. And whenever they would learn Chumash, even as a young child, he would always ask the questions that Rashi and the commentaries asked. He always anticipated them. So when they came to this part, so the first question that's asked, that Rashi asks, the commentary, it says that he saw the ladder and he saw angels. What were they doing first? Were they ascending or they were descending? You'd think they were descending first. Angels first come from heaven, then they return. But here it says, they're first ascending and then they're descending. So Rashi, as he usually does, immediately jumps on that. Seems like the wrong order. Where are they ascending? Where are they coming from? Angels are heavenly creatures, are heavenly entities. They're spiritual entities. They should be coming down first and then going back. And Rashi gives his answer. The answer is because these were the angels that were escorting Jacob as he left Beersheba. In other words, the same point that the angels escort us in our journey. So the angels that were escorting him as he was traveling went up, and then a new set of angels came down. But when the originator came to this, when he was learning it in Cheder with his teacher, and they read the verse for the first time, and he didn't stop, he didn't say anything. And he was always precise, he always caught mistakes, or not mistakes, he always caught in contradictions or questions, or, he always caught things that seemed oddities in the verse. So his teacher asked him, don't you see anything odd in this verse? So he said, no. So he said, doesn't it say the angels are going up and then they come down? Is that odd? And his answer was, it's not a question. The whole thing is a dream. Yeah. And dreams, weird things happen in dreams. Dreams don't have to make sense. We all have bizarre things happening in dreams. That was his answer. So it's interesting to take. So it was a dream, but the question really then is, so what is going on here? Why is it so relevant, this? And as I said, it's a dream. It's not an actual ladder. And a dream is a tangible, a very vivid image of a ladder. So when you read a bit into the Medrash and the commentaries and the Talmud as well, and especially in the Zohar, and then later mystical writings, Kabbalistic and Hasidic writings, Sulam in Hebrew is a ladder. It refers to the ladder of prayer. And it's actually exactly as the verse says, it is exactly that, a ladder, a bridge. And the Zohar says that this ladder that he saw actually had 4 rungs. 4. Not 5 and not 3. 4 rungs. Maimonides talks about it as well in his guide for the perplexed. Guide for the perplexed. And different places talk about these 4 rungs and the significance, which I will address in more detail in a few moments. So the Sulam, the ladder, is actually a bridge that connects heaven and earth, exactly as the verse says it. So without even being poetic or looking for allegories or hints, it says specifically, V'hinei, he dreamt, and here is, Hinei, behold, here is a ladder that the leg of the ladder, Mutzav Arza, down below on earth, grounded on earth, V'reishei Magir Shemaim, and its head, the top of the ladder, into heaven. So you can imagine and think of a ladder between heaven and earth. So Maimonides talks about the metaphor within it, of course, and so on. But it goes deeper than that it's actually, this is why it's so critical part of the story, because Jacob, who was obviously quite intelligent, wise person, could have immediately asked the philosophical question, or the practical question. You're telling me, God, that you will be with me even in the darkness of my life, even when I'm challenged, even when things aren't working well. So I understand that I believe you, and I have faith. But what tools do I have to connect to that place when things are dark? As we all know, philosophically we understand many things. Things make a lot of sense. But then when you're in the situation yourself, it's not always as simple. It's not easy. It's easier said than done, as they say. There are things that you advise others. And when it comes to you, you can't even follow your own advice. Because once our emotions get the better of us, or once we're in a place, and this is not to be critical, just a reality of subjective life experience. Once we are in a situation, and we are personally affected by it, everything changes. I mean, the fact is, I'm sure all of you know, and I'm sure all of you have fulfilled this to the T. We're very good at giving people advice that we ourselves don't follow. And it's good advice. And advice that actually helps people. I've been guilty of this myself. That's how I know. So, Badika Manusa, I've tested it. So why is that the case? It's not because we're being hypocrites or liars. It's because when you can't really see it always on yourself. Just like you ever hear your voice on a tape recorder or on a recording. Anybody likes their voice when you hear it for the first time? I hear myself sometimes. I can't stand it, to be very honest. I say, like, how can anybody listen to this guy? You know. Now when I hear myself speaking now, I don't hear what you're hearing. I'm hearing, I don't know, what my own diaphragm, whatever it works. So. Not that easy, or sometimes like when you're underwater and you hear things differently. Just like we don't really hear ourselves or as others do, we also don't see ourselves as others do. And it's part of human nature, where we're avasatzme, which means self-love, mechasal kol davar, covers over everything. We minimize things. How often are you irritated by somebody, and then when you really step back and you honestly praise, you say you do exactly the same thing, but by you minimize it, or you don't really see it. You see it someone else. It's very, very pronounced. The Baal Shem Tov would even say that you wouldn't see it in someone else if you didn't have it yourself. That we're all that life is like a mirror image, and the reason we've shown it in others is for us to fix something within ourselves, not to just become critical of others and irritated. So the fact of the matter is, it's very hard to really look at yourself in a very honest way. And that itself does not, that's the way we were created. And there's reasons for that. We are naturally biased, and we are naturally subjective. All that is very healthy, because that's how we protect ourselves. That's how we are concerned about our issues. When it becomes not healthy is when you deny that you're biased. When you start deceiving yourself into thinking, no, you got it all figured out. As the Baal Shem Tov actually says, that there's two types of darkness. There's a darkness where you know it's dark. You know you're ignorant, or you know you don't know. And then there's aster panai, as a verse used later in the book of Deuteronomy at the end of Vayelech. When we read around Rosh Hashanah Yom Kippur time, that aster panai, that the concealment itself is concealed to the point that you don't even know it's dark. You think it's light and bright. So there's people there are those that know they don't know. There are those that don't know they don't know, which of course is always more dangerous. Because you don't even know you need help. You don't even know it's dark. You don't even know there's a problem. Which of course compounds the problem so many times over. So, in that context, in that sense, that Jacob basically anticipating this dilemma, it's one thing God promises him, and I'm sure Jacob was a man of faith and he accepted the promises. But it's more than that. He wanted, what are the tools? What do I do when I'm in a dark place and I don't feel that you're there with me? As much as I read in the Bible and the books, as much as we hear, and as much as we even look at Jewish history, I mean, nobody can deny the miraculous existence of the Jewish people despite all odds. So clearly something, it was not man-made. It wasn't like Jews came up with some device how to survive. If they did, why don't they just be able to pass it on to anyone, the secret? But there's no question that when you look at history, you see something protected, even in the worst of times. And of course, I know immediately the Holocaust comes up and all the other disasters. But look, the fact is we're still here. I'm not justifying or trying to in any way explain away the Holocaust. The tragedy always remains a tragedy. But there's something to be said about that survival. And yet, when we are in our dark space, when we are desperate, when we feel despair, anxiety, we all know, every one of us knows, when we're in that type of place, it's almost impossible to really see anything beyond ourselves. And you don't always feel, as much as you're promised and as much as God promises, you don't always feel. So in anticipating that, God said, let me show Jacob a ladder. Because a ladder is a tool. A ladder is a vehicle by which you, not God, of course God can reach to us any given time, but which you, Mo Jacob, meaning you, each of us, you can climb on this ladder. And this ladder is there for you. And the ladder is not in heaven. The ladder begins on earth, together with you in the place of wrath, in Haran, or on the way to Haran. On earth, the legs are firmly planted on the ground, where you are in your darkness, and from there you can climb and build a bridge to a place that's beyond that darkness. And that's why this ladder is so critical. Because without it, the promises are there, everything is there, except one thing is missing. How do I do something about it? Do I just have to wait for the grace of God? Is there something I can build? And here this ladder was given as a gift, that you can build such a ladder. The latter is, I mentioned before, is usually compared to prayer. But as I shall explain, even the word prayer is yet another cliche. What does prayer mean? Now, I've come to the conclusion that our prayer is a lost art, frankly. We don't even know what prayer means. Yeah, we all know the basics. Prayer means you're in a moment of need, you pray to God to help you. I understand that basic element. But what are you actually doing? Is it the cry of a child to a parent? If that's the case, why do we have all these hundreds and hundreds of pages of prayers? Why don't we just go somewhere and cry? What does a child do when they're in need? What exactly is prayer? And as we shall discuss, prayer is not just prayer. It's not just what you do in the synagogue. On Rosh Hashanah, Yom Kippur 5 prayers, and Rosh Hashanah and Shabbat 4 prayers, and every day 3 prayers. It's actually something you can do all day and all night. There's an expression in the Talmud, Halavai sheyispal adam kol hayom kulei. May it be that a person should pray all day and all night, all day long. So obviously, yes, we have a morning prayer that has a certain schedule. We have an afternoon prayer, we have an evening prayer, we have prayers for certain different times of the year. But there's the spirit of prayer, and the spirit of prayer is building a ladder, and that ladder we build all the time. But there's a secret how you build it, and I'm going to discuss that secret in 4 steps. It's 4 steps how you can climb from the darkest place to the brightest place, how you can climb from earth to heaven, any time in the year. Prayer is a concentrated form of it, which as I shall elaborate as well. So you know the story. I think it's a good way to begin this discussion on prayer of this time of the Baal Shem Tov. The Baal Shem Tov would wander around and meet Jews, many of them who were living in despair. Remember, it was very dark times. Eastern Europe was right after Chmielnicki and the pogroms and the Cossacks, and the Jews were very demoralized by the situation, which was also why, just a little while earlier, they gave way to Shabtai Tzvi, the false Messiah, because there was a desperation. People were very vulnerable, fragile. They were waiting for some type of savior. The wrong one came around. So the Baal Shem Tov, living in those type of times, they say actually Baal Shem Tov's name was Yisrael. Yisrael is the name of the Jewish people, the name of Jacob. Next week's chapter, Jacob's get that name from actually Esav's archangel. And Yisrael, because Yisrael is the name of people, because Baal Shem Tov in a sense was like a wake-up call. Now example given is that when someone faints, you whisper their name in their ear. A name has the ability to even wake up a person in a faint, because the name touches a very deep part of ourselves. So Baal Shem Tov was wandering around. He came to a town, and he comes into the synagogue, and he sees the morning prayer is over. Everybody files off, goes back home or to work, wherever they were going. And one man remained sitting there. And the Baal Shem Tov was curious to see what he's doing. And he's reading the prayer book. And he goes closer, looks over his shoulder. He's very concentrated. He was oblivious. He didn't notice the Baal Shem Tov watching him. Baal Shem Tov sees he's reading the entire prayer book. He just finished already the morning service. He's already reading the afternoon service. And as he continues, he sees him reading the evening service. And he reads the prayer, what you say at a bris, what you say at a funeral, God forbid, what you say at a wedding, what you say at a pidyon haben, what you say at Sheva Brachas, what you say at a Sfiras HaOmer, counting of the Omer. He's reading and reading. And Baal Shem Tov is very curious. He sees him reading the whole Siddur. Now you can imagine, what you say on Passover, you don't say on Sukkot. And what you say on Sukkot, you don't say on Shavuos. But this man was reading the entire prayer book. Well, finally came already 1, 2 in the afternoon. He finally finished. Baal Shem Tov waited patiently. And when the man finished, he saw him. They said, Shalom Aleichem, hello. Baal Shem Tov said, you pray very beautifully. But I think I can show you how to pray even more beautifully. And he opened up the Siddur. And he said to him, and once they started talking, he started telling him, listen, the guy tells the Baal Shem Tov, look, I grew up, my parents, I was orphaned when I was a young child, I had to go to work. But I was always envious of all those that learned Hebrew and learned in school, and I never learned, so I decided to pray. Baal Shem Tov realized that he didn't even know that there's a difference between a morning prayer, an afternoon prayer, an evening prayer, and a bris, and a chasana, and a pidyon haben, and and Sfiras Omer, and Chanukah, and Purim, and so on. So Baal Shem Tov, of course, in a sensitive manner, was not going to in any way humiliate him. So Baal Shem Tov said, let me tell you something. Prayer book is made up of many sections, and you don't have to say them all every day. I'll put markings, I'll put little markers, bookmarks, inside the prayer book, and I'll mark down, this is to where you read the morning service, this is what you read in the afternoon, and he marked it. Baal Shem Tov spent a little while, and marked up the whole siddur with bookmarks. So he was able to come to realize exactly where, and the man was elated, this way he doesn't have to spend 7 hours every day reading the entire prayer book. Okay, Baal Shem Tov goes off his way. Well, a few days pass, and this guy is, like, as I said, he's a new experience. One morning, unfortunately, somebody comes over by the table that he was praying, pushes the table, and the siddur falls on the prayer book falls on the floor. And all the bookmarks went flying. So now, he no longer had the bookmarks, and he felt completely, disturbed. So he started looking around. Where's the Baal Shem Tov when he needs him? Because he wanted him to mark up the book. And he sees the Baal Shem Tov walking at the edge of the town, out the window. So he starts running after him. Starts running and running and running. Baal Shem Tov is a very fast walker. They're walking in the woods, and this guy can't catch up. Finally, he sees all the way down. He's out of breath. He sees down the woods. He sees a small rivulet. So he realized the Baal Shem Tov is going to have to slow down to find a way to cross the river. But as they say, Mazel would have it, the Baal Shem Tov had his ways. He came to the river, didn't slow down. He spread out a handkerchief and walked over the water. Okay. Well, this man, in his enthusiasm and his excitement, didn't think twice. He did the same thing. He took out his handkerchief and also walked over the water. He copied. Finally catches up to the Baal Shem Tov. And Baal Shem Tov, surprised, what are you doing all the way here? He says, I've been running after you for the last half hour. You're a very fast walker. But thank God I finally caught up with you. And he says, and Baal Shem Tov said, what are you doing here? He says, I had a problem. My siddur fell down. All the bookmarks are gone. I wanted you to mark it up again. He says, but how'd you get here? He said, I followed you. He said, what'd you do by the river? That's what I want to know. He says, I did what you did. You took out you walked over, I also walked over. Baal Shem Tov smiled and said to him, if that's the case, continue praying like you always prayed. Which is, of course, a lesson in sincerity and the essence of prayer. The Talmud says, Ezuhu Aveda Shebelev. What is the service of the heart? The service of the Aveda Shebelev, Zuhi Tefillah. This is prayer. Maybe we get the chairs for everybody. Why don't you come on. It's plenty. Zuhi Tefillah. This is prayer. So the Talmud defines in 2 words the real meaning of prayer. And that is the service of the heart. Let's explain what that means. What means the service of the heart? Service of the heart, of course, a good contrast would be the service of the mind. What's the difference between the mind and the heart? So service of the mind is usually refers to Torah study. When you study with your mind and you understand and try to comprehend any type of idea within Torah, that's you using your mind. Asking questions, answers, counter questions, counter answers, and so on. Service of the heart is exercising your emotions, which of course is much more complicated. Everyone understands that the mind can be exerted, can be challenged. And there's a thing called exerting your mind to really try to understand something, break your head, so to speak. You don't understand, you read it again. You read commentaries, you discuss it with others, you argue about it. This is called the process of free inquiry, the process of the curious mind, the intellectual process of coming to understand things that are confusing or were not understood. Every intellectual process has those stages of how you come from a place of not understanding, less understanding, to more understanding. But what does it mean to exercise your heart? So we all know it means maybe heart exercise in the context of a medical sense of the word. Any type of cardiovascular exercises that get your heart pumping and breathing. But what does it mean? Obviously, it's not referring to that. Exercising your heart means that you can also do things to develop the way you emote. And in essence, that is the real secret art of prayer. True prayer is not about lip service. It's not about just saying words or coming into a synagogue and everybody singing together. True prayer is learning how to emote, how to speak from your heart, how to express yourself, how to celebrate being vulnerable, if you wish. Which, of course, in our time and age, the crisis of relationships is really the crisis of emotions, if you think about it. That's what relationships are about. People have minds, people have great minds, but the great mind doesn't mean you have a great relationship. Because relationship has to do with your emotions. Emotional intelligence is the way it was coined recent years. And this is something much harder to understand how you cultivate. How do you mature emotionally? Intellectually, yeah, you can be lazy and maybe not grow intellectually. We all have our procrastination, we all have our resistance, our laziness. But we all understand the process. The process is you want to push your mind. There are ways to do so. Whether it's in the process of formal education or other things that tax your mind or challenge you to expand your horizons, to expand your brain power. And with effort, we know that we can do that. People do it. But the heart is a much harder thing to understand. How does one, the service of the heart? As I mentioned earlier, one of the reasons it's so difficult is because we can't even recognize our hearts well. Because we're subjective. When it comes to mind, if you're not an honest person, that's one thing. But if you're an honest person, you know, okay, here are things I'm an expert in, here are things I'm not an expert in. And if you're secure with yourself, you're not going to try to delude yourself or others into saying, I know everything. There are things I don't know, and I humbly acknowledge that, and I go and study. Or I go to an expert, or I go to a consult with a specialist. We do this all the time. Whether we go to a lawyer or a doctor or an accountant, we're going to someone that knows a certain area that we don't know. Even though accountants will tell you that the worst enemies of all their clients are the clients themselves. They hire an accountant and then they don't listen to their accountant because no one wants to always hear at the end of the year all the mistakes you made. It's too much for the ego. But at least we understand that process of growing intellectually. There are areas we know, some areas we may never be experts in, others will be much bigger experts than us. But emotionally, the first impediment is we don't even know where we are emotionally. Most of us would like to believe we're emotionally mature. Most of us will not like to acknowledge that we're very subjective and blinded and make constantly mistakes. Most people do not acknowledge that. We acknowledge that maybe when we hit rock bottom. When you see it's really not working, and then you have to surrender. But until that point, why would you surrender? You can delude yourself into thinking you're very emotionally developed. I mean, I can't tell you hundreds. I counsel couples and people who think they're couples, or people who should be couples, or whatever it is. You get the idea. And this is an issue you can't even really address it head on with most people, because nobody wants to hear that you're just a little 2-year-old immature emotional person. Not because I want to be mean. Sometimes you see that. So you have to find all kinds of sophisticated ways to couch it. But the bottom line is, unless someone hears it, like when you go to a doctor, God forbid, you don't want to hear a couch diagnosis. You want to hear what it is so you know what to do about it. When it comes to emotional thing, nobody wants to hear what it is. That's how it is. That's part of emotions. Especially an immature person does not want to hear they're immature. A mature person also is not that easy to hear all our faults. And I'm not talking about coming from a person who's malicious. Obviously, many of us have been hurt by people who so-called are our friends and our counselors and our advisors. So obviously at some point you just don't want to go to anybody who's just going to pull rank or be condescending or try to be, feel greater about themselves if they make you feel worse about yourself. But let's say you do meet someone you could trust. It's not easy. And all of us know that there's no one here, there's no one, including myself, that can easily deal with, especially the biggest blind spots. So just emotional awareness, let alone emotional growth, is a complicated matter. To be even aware, where do you stand? As I said, intellectually you can take an IQ test. Fine, that may not work in all areas. There are other tests, there are other ways to measure. Maybe they can't really quantify physically a person's pure intelligence. There are people who, for example, are very street smart. Hard to measure street smart. Much easier to measure book smart. Because book smart, you know a certain amount of information. It's true, it's hard to measure, but there's still ways to quantify it. Emotional awareness is much, much more complicated. As I said, that's not even getting into emotional growth. If you're not really fully aware, how are you going to even climb this ladder? This is why the Torah makes it such a significant component that one of the first stories in Jewish history, in all of history, is this ladder that Jacob dreams of. Because God was saying, here's a way for you to climb, and here are the steps. And this is really, as I said, it's definitely a lost art called prayer. I saw a few individuals, but not many, but a few in my life that prayed on a Shabbos, sitting under a talus, which is a prayer shawl. I saw someone pray for 8 hours. Can you imagine someone praying for 8 hours? And not because they don't know Hebrew and it takes them long to read a sentence. Totally fluent, major scholars. What are they doing under a talus for 8 hours? So I remember asking my father this question when I was a child. I grew up in a Hasidic community, and there were a few. Not many, as I said. I could count them on my hand. But I saw them, the real thing. So I asked my father as a child, what is he doing for 8 hours? Besides the question, is he hungry and not want to go to lunch or something like that? That I didn't ask, because at some point I understood that there's something, some people are really into something. They're not just, lunch, can come later. And I remember my father told me, what do you say to a child? My father says he's crying about existence. That's what my father told me. Which I had no clue what my father was saying. As a child you cry, you're on a candy, you cry because you stubbed your toe, you cry for some other foolish thing, For a child it's not foolish, but what's someone crying about existence? Then you later, as I get a little older, start learning about what's called existential loneliness. And crying to try to connect to heaven. And yes, it does not because, you could say someone who's in deep pain, had a great loss, has a lot of anxiety, is sitting under a talit, a shawl, to pray, to deal with their pain. But I'm talking about people who did not necessarily were experiencing particular pain, but existence is painful. People like that who feel how dark this world is, even if they're not necessarily immediately suffering, but understand suffering in the world as being their problem as well, because we're all in one boat. People like that can sit under a talus and cry and pray for 8 hours. And it's not tears that you have to have compassion for, it's actually tears of strength. It's a person who's aware, sensitive, and trying to build a bridge like that. Now, I'm not suggesting, or maybe we will, at the end of this evening, that all of you will have the tools to go and pray tomorrow for 8 hours. That would be pretty cool. Even if you can get around your jobs, which of course are very important as well. But what I would like to achieve is at least lay out the map of these 4 rungs, and in language that each of us can relate to, which are really 4 steps in lifting yourself from whatever place you're at, and each of us has our own place, to a higher place. And I'm sure you all would agree that we all can grow. We all, as blind as our emotions may be, nobody's going to say, I can't grow. That I've never met. So all of us know we can always climb. And like a ladder, interestingly about a ladder, one of the things that a ladder is a great metaphor for, the truth is steps are as well, but the stairway to heaven is probably a plagiarism of this verse, of a ladder to heaven. But one of the beautiful the elements of a ladder, like any step, is interesting thing is you don't climb 10 steps at once. You can't climb a ladder in one shot. One leg goes onto one rung, a higher rung. The other leg remains on the lower rung, and then you move the lower leg up a rung, then you go again. In other words, a step-by-step process. which immediately makes it called divide and conquer. It makes it tafasta meruba le tafasta, which means don't bite off more than you can chew. You're going step by step. And it's also not that, we'll call it, what's the word I want to use? It's not that, I'm looking for a very simple English word, frankly, I just have a blind spot. Okay. Maybe it's a Freudian emotional block I have. But the word I want to use is that it's not it doesn't shock up our systems. If someone were to tell you that you have to go cold turkey, drop everything you're doing if you want to climb, so even if that's necessary, the prospect is daunting. It's impossible. I'm going to suddenly change my whole life. Very difficult to do things like that, especially to sustain it. But when you're told it's step by step, which means you don't really give up your past immediately. You go one step, your other leg is still on the lower rung, so you're still in your comfort zone, but you're testing the waters. That makes it a lot more doable. So what the word I was looking for? It's like, in other words, it's not not the word revolting. It's not requiring a total shift or a total change of consciousness. Comfort zone is very much part of who we are. But comfort zone also, as I discussed a few months ago, class of comfort zones, because it can also be our worst enemy, because you're comfortable there. Why would you change? Even if the status quo is not perfect, like the known enemy is better than the unknown enemy, for example. So to get someone out of a comfort zone and say, listen, you got to move and do everything new, it's very, very, almost impossible. But if you tell someone you still have part of your comfort zone, but here, just use one leg, or just look at a place that you may have not traveled to yet. Don't go there, just get an appetizer. That makes it easier for our systems to be able to assimilate and integrate. And that's a critical component in any real journey. To go step by step. It's much what they call the derech arucha ktsara. The long, short road is always healthier than the short, long road. The difference? The story goes in the Talmud that there was a man traveling to Jerusalem, or to a city. It doesn't say in the Talmud Jerusalem, but other places they say it's Jerusalem. And he comes to a fork in the road, and he doesn't know which way to go. So if Yogi Berra was there, he would tell him, come to a fork in the road, take it. In this case, he met the little children he met a little child, one of the Jerusalem kids. They're known for their shrewdness and their intelligence, for their wit. And he asked the child, he says, which way is the way to Jerusalem? So the child says to him, this is the short, long road. And this is the long, short road. And actually, the way the Talmud says it, he says, this is the short, long road. So it sounds short and long, it sounds pretty short to him. It definitely sounds shorter than long, short, for whatever reason. So he starts traveling on that road, and yes, he sees the city right up ahead. He's excited, but then he's suddenly struck by the shrubs and vines and thorns and overgrowth. He can't make it through. So the city is not far, but there are too many impediments in the way for him. So he goes back and he meets the child and he says, you told me it's a short way? He says, yeah, I said short and long. This is the long and short way. So he takes the second path, and here he travels much longer. So physically it's a longer road, but there are no impediments. And this is used as an example for the paths that we choose in life. All of us usually choose the short long, because we want it fast, especially in our fast food age and instant gratification. We want it quick and we want it now. When it comes to real growth, emotional growth, spiritual growth, transcendental growth, the short long road never works. It can work for a while, but it's like sugar coated. It'll give you a high, but it won't last. And definitely will not be sustainable and integrated into your system. I remember a fellow years ago, it was a stand-up comic, came to this class many years ago. And he was a Jewish fellow, but he grew up in a secular home, and he was starting to go to Friday nights to keep Shabbat, eat Shabbat dinner, and he was very intrigued by it. And he came to me after a few months, and he said to me, wanted my advice. He said, I love the Shabbos. I want to keep Shabbos. However, my parnasa, my livelihood, comes from my gigs, which are always booked on Thursday night, Friday night, and Saturday night. I said, there's some people who will tell you, hey, it says in the Torah to keep Shabbat. God, who gave us Shabbat, will also give us the blessings for livelihood. So keep the Shabbos, and God will surely take care of you. That should be your attitude. I said, there are others that may say that, listen, since you didn't grow up with it, and since we can find loopholes, maybe you can walk to the place, you can use a mic, because we can find some way to, some halachic or some, as I said, some opening. And tailor Shabbos to your specifications, so to speak. So I said, even though the first response is the one that I consider to be correct, but I'm not going to tell you that, and I'm also not going to tell you response number 2, which I don't consider to be correct. There's a third option. The third option is that I'm not going to tell you what to do. I will teach you, if you wish, what Shabbos is about. The consequences of keeping Shabbos, the consequences of not keeping it. She said, why can't you just tell me? Why don't you just... So I said, because I want you to own your choice. If I tell you is what I would do, or what I believe should be done, you may start keeping Shabbos and love it, and then a few months will pass by, and your pocketbook will start pinching you, and you'll say, hey, I made a deal with God, and God, I'm keeping Shabbos, and God's not keeping his part of the deal. And you'll get angry, and you may have actually, you may be a setback, and you will reject the whole Judaism. Whereas if you go the long, short road, is learn about it, try it, until you're ready, and then make a decision, a mature choice. And that mature choice is based on knowing that there's no magic tricks. Yes, you could have faith. Hopefully God will deliver. But if you're not going to work on Thursday, Friday, Shabbos, Saturday night, it may affect you. So you need to know how to accept Shabbos anyway. Anyway, he didn't like what I said, and he was upset at me, and he went off and he did start keeping Shabbos on his own. And that's exactly what happened. It wasn't a prophecy on my part, it was basic common sense. A few months passed, things weren't going so well. He was not getting enough money, and he was starting to get very angry, and he got angry, then he started seeing all the cracks in the Jewish community, and these are hypocrites, and all the people that showed me kindness. The honeymoon is over, of course, after the first few months, and then he could not really handle the whole thing. And he dropped Shabbos, and he got angry at Judaism altogether. A few years passed, and then, today he is a Shomer Shabbos. He came back to it on his own, but he learned to own it. And once he owned it, he found ways. He found gigs. He found, creative ways to make a living that did not compromise his Shabbos. So this means that you grow step by step, and that doesn't mean that the truth isn't there. There are many truths. The question is whether you're ready to hear it, whether you're ready to live by it. This should also not be an excuse that a person says, hey, look, since I'm not comfortable with it, I should never grow. We have to be honest people. And you have to just know that it is climbing a ladder. And a ladder means step by step by step. So what are the 4 basic steps of this 4-rung sulam that goes from earth to heaven? How do you travel and get from a place of the darkest place of wrath to a place that is considered, as he says, sulam mutzav arza, it stands on earth, and doesn't just say eretz, it says arza, which is within land itself, within earth itself, the earthiness of earth. And Reisha Magia Hashamayma, and its head, the top, reaches heaven and the deepest parts of heaven. So the 4 stages of general prayer, and as you'll see, this is more than just prayer, this is really 4 stages of any type of growth, is generally broken into, and I'll tell you where they are in the morning prayer. One is called the Birchas HaShachar. First morning blessings that we say as soon as we awake. Starts with the Moda'ani, the classic Moda'ani. And then different blessings acknowledging the blessings of our life. The blessings of God who dresses the naked, that gives us wisdom, intelligence, that allows us to distinguish between light and dark, and so on and so forth. Basic blessings of life. That's stage 1. Stage number 2 is called Psuka de Zimra, which means the verses of song. These are primarily discuss the beauty of nature, seeing God's hand in existence. So it's not about our own basic survival and our basic needs and acknowledging that. This is a certain type of meditation on nature and recognizing the design and the elegance and the beauty of the tapestry called life. The third is Krishma Shema, the blessings before Shema and then the Shema, which talks about divine unity. Talks about divine unity, Hashem Echad, and it talks about us understanding God on God's terms. And then the fourth is the Amidah, that we say when we rise, when we stand. The only prayer we say is standing completely. We say it with our feet together. And every day it's 18. The Shemon Esrei, it's called the 18 blessings. On Shabbos and holidays, it's not 18 blessings, but it's also the Amidah, the standing, which is considered the peak, the apex, the climax of the prayer service. There's still services there's still prayers that said after Amidah, but this is the main structure of a morning service. As you'll see, there's a science behind it, and there's a powerful psychological build-up that these 4 stages discuss 4 stages of growth. And here's how it works. And they climb. They're literally like climbing a ladder. Meaning the 4th rung you can't get to the 4th rung if you don't begin with the 1st rung. Even if you have strong legs and you can jump, but it's not going to work properly. So the first stage, in one word, is called Haidah. It's acknowledging. It's acknowledgement. The word Moda'ani, the first word that should be uttered from the mouth of a person when they wake up, should be Moda. I acknowledge. Just think about the power of one word. How many people begin their day saying, I acknowledge? The first thing most of us naturally think is me, I need something. Not your acknowledge. Acknowledging means that it's not about me, it's about acknowledging something outside of me. So most of us naturally, our selfish tendencies, our self-interest, our sense of self, begins with me. And here we say not ani moida, you say moida ani. So acknowledgement. Acknowledgement in Hebrew is the word Haidah. Sometimes Yehuda, the 3rd tribe, the 4th tribe, Reuven, Shevet, Levi, Reuven, Shimon, Levi, Yehuda. So Yehuda comes from the word Haidah, to acknowledge. Modim, we say Modim, Moda'ani. Yehudi is a name for Jews that's used specifically, primarily in the Megillah. Yehudim. The Talmud says Yehudim comes from the word acknowledging. So no matter who you are, no matter what situation you're in, even if you're not on a very sophisticated level, every person has the ability to acknowledge. Every person has the ability to say thank you on a very basic level. So the first rung to climb out of any hole, to climb out of any earthy experience, including despair and darkness, is always remembering that there's something above you and that you're acknowledging. You may not yet understand it, and you probably don't understand it. You may not even feel it. We're not talking about feelings now, we're not talking about contemplation, intelligence. We're talking about basic acknowledgement that you teach even a little child to say thank you, to acknowledge a gift, to acknowledge So that's the first stage. Now, what does it mean in psychological terms before I go to the other 3 stages? Simply as this. I've used this example in the past. One of the traps, and I'm using now extreme examples simply to make the case, but it could also be understood in a more subtle form. One of the real difficulties when a person is deeply depressed or deeply anxious, panic attack, whatever it may be, and I'm not talking now clinical that may need other type of intervention, but one of the big traps of that type of state of mind or state of being is that you completely get consumed by whatever that emotion is. And even if someone says to you, you're not being rational, you're not being balanced, you're being paranoid, or you're being everything you see, only darkness, there's also light, you can't see it. Because if you could, you wouldn't be so overwhelmed. One of the strange but also healthy elements of memory loss, meaning, is that we don't remember the shock of an experience the same way a year later. If we were living in the pain of a moment of loss, and we'd never lose that type of intensity, we wouldn't be able to function. The fact that we forget, in that sense, is healthy. That doesn't mean we forget entirely, but the overwhelming impact of any shock that comes initially from any trauma is something that is healthy for it to pass at some point. At that point, it's important to experience that as well, but at some point it's important for it to pass. Now, if you get so consumed with negative feelings and you can't get out of that, that becomes the biggest trap. It's not the anxiety any longer. It's that there's nothing else except it. The fact that you can acknowledge something, and you're trained to acknowledge, even if it's mechanical, is already letting in a ray of hope. You could even argue that why the first step of the 12-step program is basically surrendering. Surrendering that I'm not in control, and I surrender to a force that's above me. It's taken from the basic modani. It's the first ray of hope, because it means, the Talmud says, "Ein chavish mater es atzmei," meaning a person in fetters cannot free themselves. When you're tied up in rope, you can't free yourself. You need someone else to untie you. When you're trapped in a pit, and there's no ladder and there's nothing to climb, you need someone to throw you a rope. Acknowledgement is the first way that you allow in a ray of hope, a ray of light into a seemingly helpless situation. So just the mere fact of acknowledging is already something. Just to get somebody to say, I don't have it all figured out. I'm not completely like a complete airtight reality of whether it's anxiety or pain or whatever it is. And this is something that can be expected of everyone, which is why in Jewish tradition, we pray in the morning, and that's not something that's optional. You should be praying even if you're not in the mood. As a matter of fact, if you're not in the mood, it may be more important to do so. Because that acknowledgement in the morning, not to allow yourself to indulge in your own feelings, but to actually allow yourself to acknowledge there's more than you to existence, is the first opening to any type of healing. In other words, it's called humility. It's like in other words, arrogance can take on two shapes. One shape is a person who's pompous, full of himself or herself, only thinks about it himself and no one else. But there's another form of arrogance, which we usually don't call arrogance. It's called being self-pity, completely consumed with your own pain. It's also selfish and arrogant. When someone says, I'm worthless, that's a form of arrogance, because who are you to say you're worthless? Why are you the final arbiter, the final expert on who's worth something or not worth? So arrogance can take the shape of feeling that you're worth more than everybody, but it can also take the shape that you're worth less than everybody. Because it's coming from the same root. You decided, and that's it. No one can argue with you. That's called self-worship. This one worships through bombastic, through over-exaggerated sense of self, and this one worships through an under-exaggerated sense of self. Which is why one of the Rebbes once said that just as we had to know our own weaknesses, we also have to know our own strengths. If God created you in the divine image, and you recognize that, there's no way that you're worthless. You may make all the mistakes in your life, you may not act on it, that's your choice. But to suggest that you're worthless essentially denying God's creation of you. It's like saying to God, no, you created something that's valuable, and I decided I'm not valuable. So Moda'ani is essentially that acknowledgement. I acknowledge to you for returning my soul to me. So no matter how miserable you may feel about yourself, I'm using extreme, obviously, hopefully none of us feel that miserable about ourselves. But even if you did, or feel bad down, here's a new morning was given to you. You have a renewed contract that God put you here another morning and said, here you are. And you acknowledge that in the morning. Just acknowledging. Nothing more. We're not talking about necessarily fully integrating, which will come the next stages. So that's step number one. And as I said, this is not just doing prayer is a time when it's concentrated, but this is something we can do any time in the day. It's an exercise. It's an exercise of not being completely focused on yourself. Which ironically is the first way to really heal yourself, is not being focused completely on yourself. Because the self is healthy to some extent, but if you're completely absorbed by the self, there's no healing going to happen. Stage number 2 is, we can call this already a type of, this is second step in emotional development. Talk about emotional growth. So the first step, even though you may not feel it at the time, but the mere fact that you acknowledge is already an opening, because you're saying, emotions tell you, me, I and nothing else. Ani v'afseid. And acknowledgement breaks that stranglehold of the ego and says there is more than you. So that's already the first step in emotions. And trust me, that's the first step in any relationship therapy, in any counseling, is to get two parties to come to discover it's not just about you. There's a little more. Acknowledge that, and you have an opening. It still doesn't mean we have a game plan, but at least you have the beginning. If you don't have that, there's nowhere to go. Because people get completely consumed by themselves and they can't move. So the second stage is a contemplation, which is Psukkah de Zimra, where you contemplate on the beauty of nature and existence. It's essentially recognizing God in the universe. Recognizing that there is a plan, recognizing divine providence, recognizing that that there is a divine hand inside the glove. So this is obviously a higher stage than the first one, which is just an acknowledgement. This you're beginning to actually sense something. These four levels that I'm going to describe are also in our own, as a child develops. A newborn child obviously is not yet conscious of anything that you can really communicate. But the first stages where education starts taking place is you're really just teaching a child to listen. A child to know that there are rules. Not necessarily in a harsh or disciplined way, you just need to teach a child. There's a dangerous world. You can't just cross the street yourself. You have to say thank you to someone. You have a friend and playing with. Basic rules, the basic moda'ani state. But then comes stage number 2, that I'm describing now, where you can actually begin to train a person to think about the bigger picture. But it's a bigger picture within nature, within existence. You could say it's God on our terms, not God on God's terms. So this is what's called in Hasidic thought and Kabbalistic thought, what's called Ur Pnimi, or Mamala Kalam. It's how God permeates existence. And let's think of it in our personal terms. It would be contemplating on your own body even. Your own body, your own health. A healthy body. It's a miracle that so many systems and 75 trillion cells are so coordinated and they work with each other. So this is not just acknowledging. Acknowledging is, even if you don't get that, you still acknowledge. This is already actually appreciating the gift of life, appreciating the divine hand in nature, divine providence, that our footsteps are led somewhere. Obviously, acknowledgement will be much richer when you have this type of meditation, because now you're beginning to appreciate, you're beginning to see empirical evidence, empirical experience of something that is a divine hand. So that's the second, that's Psukkah de Zimra, which focuses mostly on nature, the beauty of nature, the heavens, the earth, the celestial bodies, and so on. Stage number 3 is the Shema. In the Shema we declare the divine unity, Hashem Echad. This already is a much more mature and higher state of emotional development, because here you're beginning to understand God on God's terms, which is a concept of a higher unity. We look at a universe that's very diverse. In stage 2, you see the diversity, yet you know that it's the fingers of an artist. In stage 3, you start thinking about the artist himself, not necessarily his painting called life and nature. And that is a much higher state of emotional development, because now you really experience transcendence. That's transcendence. Because level 2 is still related to existence, it's still related to your survival, it's still related to your health or the world around us. Level 3 is more abstract. You start thinking, what is the reality of God outside of me? And when you start thinking that, you are actually, your head then is starting to enter into the clouds, into heaven. So if you could say the first 2 rungs of the ladder are more closer to earth, obviously. The first is on earth, it's the first rung, a little above your earthy state, your selfish state, and you acknowledging something. Rung 2 is an emotional development where you realize that there's the artist within this painting that we see. And stage 3 is, the last 2 stages are closer to heaven. Stage 3 being a sense of transcendence, that There's some reality that's beyond us all. And that really, what it does is lift you to a completely different place. The things that you think are important are not that important. That's why we close our eyes. We cover our eyes when we say Shema. Because now, but before that, why don't you cover your eyes in the other part of the prayer? Because then you have to have your eyes open. You want to see the world around you. You want to see nature, but you want to recognize the divine hand in nature. In stage 3, we're talking now about closing and not looking at the world around us and looking at a reality beyond us. You know, there's I think I've shared this in the past. There was this debate between a philosopher and a rabbi. They were debating the existence of God. Okay, so look, I can imagine an endless debate that was going nowhere. And after a while, the philosopher was stuck in his denial, his agnosticism, and the rabbi was stuck in his faith, and they were going nowhere. So the rabbi says to the agnostic, he says to him, you know what? I envy you, because you think about God all the time. I have to admit that I think about myself all the time. And with that, they part ways. So this philosopher was very impressed, very flattered actually, that this great rabbi gave him this compliment. And he would share this compliment with everyone and say, we had this debate. At the end of the day, the rabbi acknowledged and said that I think about God and he thinks about himself. The rabbi himself admitted that. Until one day he meets a wise man who tells him, you're a fool. The rabbi actually insulted you, to the point you didn't even think it was an insult, you thought it was a compliment. The insult was that he was telling you like this, for the rabbi, he knows that God exists. He doesn't have to think about God. He thinks about himself. Do I exist? Maybe I don't exist. What's my role in this whole picture? You think about yourself all day. So you don't have to think, that's a given. So what you contemplate about it, does God exist? So you're thinking about God. Yes, maybe God, maybe not a God. These are not just two different attitudes, they're actually two different perspectives. There's a perspective that what is reality? A few weeks ago I spoke about where does a soul go to after death? The famous question everyone asks. And the question, as I pointed out, itself is based on arrogance. Like the question of a refrigerator asking electricity, where do you go when they pull the plug? And the electricity responds, obviously, what kind of chutzpah, what kind of nerve do you have? What do you mean, where I go? You're a little box they just invented the last 100, 200 years, and you ask me where I go? I go where I'm. Who says you think you know where it's at? And the electricity, are like some type of superimposed state of being. The truth is the other way around. I was always around. I just go back to my natural place, which doesn't occupy time and space as you know it. All you know is your reality inside your box. So the Shema level, the third level, is beginning to make us think. And this can only come, obviously, after the other first two stages. That 1 second here. Maybe the whole thing is inverted. What is reality? Is the hand the reality or the glove? Just because you see the glove, and that's the only thing you relate to, that doesn't mean that's reality. It just means that's what you can experience. So that turns the whole thing around. That reality is really that which is within, and not that which is without. So we look at the world and existence from the outside in. From the outside in, as we climb the ladder from the bottom up, this is reality. And then we start saying, what's out there? At some point you come to realize maybe that's where reality is, and the question is, what is this doing here? What stage, what little speck, or what station does this part of reality have in the scheme of the entire picture? This is what Abraham came to discover. He went through these 4 stages. He began by looking, by process of elimination, acknowledging that what he has around him is definitely not real. He saw his father was an idol manufacturer, people worshipping these inanimate things. He realized it was ridiculous. There's even the story where he goes and shatters the idols. His father comes running to him and says, why'd you destroy my business? Here I am selling a god to anybody that whatever they want. He said, I didn't shatter them. They were their gods. And I saw they got into a fight. And one god said, I'm bigger than the other one. They got jealous and they went and they started beating each other up. So his father looks at him and laughs. He says, between you and me, that's ridiculous. So he says, exactly. So what are you doing this business? So Abraham then comes, after acknowledging that, comes to search by process of elimination. He goes out into nature and searches in the meadows, in the heavens, on earth, the sun, the moon. He's looking for God. He's looking for a higher reality. And then he comes to realize the third stage, Shema, that the search itself is a distortion. I'm searching for God. If I am a piece of the big puzzle, how could a piece define the whole? The whole defines the piece. And maybe I have to stop using my aggressive tools and just shut down and let the deeper reality emerge. He discovered the secret of truth, that it emerges. You can't acquire it. But he had to go through the other stages, the other two stages. And then comes stage number 4. We'll call that ultimate transcendence. That, yes, you come to discover that there's a God beyond it all, but the same God created it all. So it becomes a fusion between our existence and the higher, our lower reality and the higher reality. And that's the Amidim. It's not just something beyond, but that beyond comes back. So it's like that example, 3 people standing and observing a beautiful, beautiful painting of a farm. And its intricate detail. You see the artist captured the way the wind blowing the grain, the trees, the flowers, the butterflies, the birds. You could see that whoever made this painting was brilliant. But they had a major disagreement of what kind of artist this was. The first one said this artist must be a great farmer. Someone who lives in this farm. Or else, how does he have such intimate knowledge? Be able to depict exactly every detail. Obviously, they didn't know who the artist was because they could only see the painting. They're trying to figure out the artist from the painting. The second one said, no, the exact opposite is true. This artist must be someone who's absolutely not a farmer. He's so brilliant, he's able to imagine what it's like. And if you met him, he's the farthest thing from a farmer. And the third one said, no, he's both. He's something completely beyond, but he's able to completely relate to the way things are down here. So when we look at the universe, the question the mystics ask, can we know God from this universe? So Spinoza would say, pantheism, that God is nature and nature is God. Meaning, yes, nature equals God. You want to know God, you have to know nature. The Torah disagrees with that and says, Hu mekayme shel elam ve'ena elam mekayme. God is nature, but nature is not God. Now that's not a contradiction, because God is more than nature. It's not that nature is God is nature plus so much more. So for something to create such a nature, it has to be something that's also beyond nature. But then there's a third stage which says that God is even beyond nature, and therefore nature and beyond nature can become one. Does that make sense? No. It didn't. That's good. So it's not supposed to make sense. I'll explain it a little better. There's a Kabbalistic statement by Ibn Gabbai in this book, Avodas HaKodesh. He says the following: that just like God has the power of the infinite, He has to have also the power of the finite. Because if you say God can only create the infinite and not finite, that itself is finite, is limiting Him. Because finite means this and not that. So if we were to define God and say God is infinite and not finite, that is a definition that is also finite. It's just defined by the infinite. Infinite set of numbers and the finite set of numbers are not the same. So therefore, we have to conclude that God is neither infinite nor finite, but beyond both, and therefore can fuse the two. You're not going to understand, if you never heard this concept before, you're not going to understand it from the first time hearing it. But think about it. Because the real question is, you see, we worship our logic. Who says logic is the end of it all? The beginning and end of it all. Logic is one part of the system. Most of the things that we do are not logical at all, yet we do them. Ultimately, the ultimate goal is to be at peace with paradoxes and realize that a paradox is not even a paradox. A paradox is only a paradox for those that see logic, are controlled and by the defined parameters and limits of logic. Anyway, if this was above some heads, so be it. It was not the point of the entire class. I just wanted to discuss the 4 levels. So this final level is a transcendence that transcends even transcendence. In simple terms, in our life, the question that's asked is, do we have to shed our earthly garments to be divine? Because you can argue the fact, as long as we eat and sleep and deal with the material matters of existence, that in many ways contradicts anything that is of a sublime spiritual nature. And that's why there is a strong school of thought, especially in the Far East, that demands asceticism, a monastic lifestyle, where you reject as much as possible the wear and tear of material life, and you climb the mountain. You live with limited material indulgence. You live with sparsely, absolutely no opulence, and so on. Some fast extensively. What is Judaism's take on this? Judaism says that to experience God only on a mountain limits God's existence. That the God that exists on Yom Kippur in a synagogue, the same God exists on Wednesday night, middle of a weekday. So it's true there are times we need for ourselves to create an oasis and go into a more pure environment. But from God's perspective, you can discover the divine as much and even more in the material world that we live in. So we do not have to shed those earthly garments. That, like he says here, the ladder remains standing on earth even when it reaches into the skies. So it's like having your feet firmly planted on the ground even while your head is in the clouds. Now, is that difficult? Yes, it's much easier asceticism in a way. Or the other extreme, to just live an indulgent life. To have both extremes, to be able to say, I'm here on earth and I'm living on the terms of this material world. At the same time, my head and my spirit is able to access a reality beyond us. That is like a paradox, but that's the ultimate objective. And that's what prayer is able to accomplish, and that's also what the 4 stages of all emotional development works this way. So the first step is you have to stop being focused entirely on yourself. As soon as if you don't have that step, there's no movement. There's no climbing any ladder. You're stuck in your own gravity. You're stuck in your own with the whirlpool, with no escape. The first step is that acknowledgement, and then come the other 3 rungs of the ladder as one climbs. So in personal development, as I said, as a child grows, as I mentioned, the acknowledgement is the first stage. Emotional development of a child recognizing the beauty, the compassion, the gifts of life. The third stage is where you realize there's something beyond us all, and that is more real than we are. And the fourth is realizing that reality put us here, and therefore you can join the two. And that in your material world, with the ladder firmly planted on the ground, you can experience the deepest levels of transcendence, the deeper levels of spirituality. As it says that one of the key differences between Jewish mysticism and other schools of mysticism is that through a deed you can accomplish more than through meditation. Only Jewish mysticism teaches that. Far Eastern mysticism, meditation achieves more than a deed. In Jewish mysticism, the deed reaches the deepest place, which can seem contradiction until you understand these 4 steps. So I will discuss this hopefully more in future coming weeks. It's obviously developed in many, many ways. But it really comes down to is that we do have tools, and we do have a method to not just to pray, but to grow emotionally. But it requires this type of effort. As I mentioned, intellectual growth is a whole different story. Intellectual growth does not necessarily affect you personally. There are people who know a lot of things and they're still the same obnoxious individuals. When you talk about emotional growth, you're actually becoming a more refined human being. So these 4 stages deal directly with your refinement because they all deal with you getting beyond the tentacles of your own subjective reality. So that's the story, in brief, the story of the ladder, the climb, the 4 steps to heaven, the climb from matter to spirit, and the fusion of the two, as depicted here in the dream of Jacob. So, I want to wish you all the the strength and fortitude to build your ladders, one ladder at a time, to build ladders. And one of the ways we do it is with each other. A ladder to heaven, it says that when two people love each other, that's a way that heaven and earth as well love each other. In other words, the human kiss is just a manifestation of a divine kiss. So when we go out of ourselves and are able to love another person and capacity to transcend our own needs and extend ourselves to someone else, even if it's not always perfectly convenient for ourselves, is a taste of transcendence. So these 4 steps are not just about how we pray or how we connect to the heaven. It's also how we connect to the heaven in other human beings, other souls. The 4 stages of any type of growth. And this can be, as I said, developed, I'm sure, into forms of therapy, forms of emotional development, character development, many other expressions of how we can get from here to there. As we spoke, as I said earlier, it's all about climbing, about growing. So, as I said, I wish you all a week where you start building ladders, start looking for those sparks that each of us have been allocated in our lives, and every time you have that sensitivity of not just thinking about me and what I can get out of it, but thinking about how you serve and what you give, you are building that type of ladder. And with that being said, let me conclude by announcing a few things, some ladder announcements. We sent out an email, but in case you haven't seen it, I just want to mention this Sunday, we're doing a film screening in Cinema Village Theater. It's on 20th Street, East 20th Street, East 12th Street. I'm sorry. Is it 12th Street? I forgot the address. Anyway, but if you would like the screening plus a discussion I'm going to have with the director of the film, which is called My Reincarnation. So we're going to discuss reincarnation and afterlife, and according to the mystical teachings, this is coming Sunday. The screening is 5:25. If you want information, it's on our website, or you can email us. And with that said, you should please, if you haven't left your email addresses, it's a good opportunity to do so we can stay in touch. I also send out a weekly article for your delight, if you wish. If you'd like to receive that, I'll be happy to send it to you. You can always unsubscribe, so don't be concerned. There's not going to be any imposition. I know it's a big thing to know that you can unsubscribe from email lists. And Philip will be doing his class tomorrow night, Philip Namaworth. For those of you familiar, he has a class. If you need more information as well, contact us in the office. And finally, what else am I going to announce? We'll be here next Wednesday and the coming Wednesdays. And for any upcoming special programs or events, we have a website, meaningfullife.com, full of material and all the schedule as well. And with that, I would like to bid you all a very good evening. And it's an honor to intersect in your spiritual journey, your soul journey. And may we build very powerful and sustainable ladders. Please see me as an asset, as a friend, an ally, to help build ladders. I'm a ladder builder. But we're all ladder builders, and we can all help each other. And so everyone have a very good evening and a good night. And I look forward to see you again next week.